The S&P 500 and the Nasdaq 100 is what we're going to be covering specifically in today's video. We have three main bullet points for this week, in my opinion, that will establish either the trend to the upside and the continuation, or establish the move back towards the downside. So I believe these are the focal points of the week and things we need to be talking about. Now, before we get into all that content, I need to ask you to consider doing two things: liking and subscribing. Every single day I post videos for you, so you are prepared on the market, you know what to expect. Good, bad, ugly, beautiful, doesn't matter. I give you my unbiased viewpoint every single day, right or wrong. Again, trying to be accountable as possible here. So make sure you like, subscribe, do what you gotta do, unsubscribe if you have to. Let's get to it. So first few things we're gonna talk about is gonna be ES and NASDAQ, obviously the focal point of everything. Now, when we get into this, I think we have a few things that will be the big movers, and we're gonna jump right into that. So this week specifically, I believe we have Microsoft earnings that will be happening Tuesday on the after hours. That'll be very important. I think this will set the tone for the entire week. Okay, we might get a little bit of fake out going into Monday. We might get a little bit of stale volume, which we'll get into here in a second. But I think Tuesday sets the tone. After that, we have follow through volume, which again is obviously the most important and general circumstances. When we get any type of bounce, or big rejection, the biggest question recently has been, can we follow through? And so we're going to get into that in a second. And we've been getting some follow through to the upside so far. And then, of course, Thursday, we have GDP information. And this is going to be pretty big. I think this also is going to be a big tone setter going into next week. So Tuesday, Thursday, basically all week. So let's dive right into this. So when we look at ES and we look at NASDAQ, let's talk about what's happening here. I've seen the charts. I've seen everyone talking about it. When you're looking at ES, everyone's expecting a little head and shoulders here, like on the 2 hour, the 1 hour, right? I want to talk about a few things, though, when we're looking at what's happening here. I want to talk about just supply and demand and overall reaction so far. So we formed a clear-cut demand down here at the 39, basically 13, down to 38.90, right? So we got a touch of that 3,900, and we bounced. Now, from that point, we have to ask, have buyers showed overall strength? What's happened from this? And from my last video, people asked a lot of questions about why didn't I mention OPEX and this and that. Well, people only want to talk about certain aspects of the market when it favors their viewpoint or favors something that actually happened. So when we don't mention OPEX and we get no movement, no one really asks any questions. They're like, oh, well, why did that happen? And then when we get a little bit of movement, it's like, oh, it had to be OPEX. So I tend to, I tend to stay away from things that I can't prove nor disprove, right? So those are big areas, and I try to always focus on saying that. So when we look at what's happening here, it's important to realize, where we bounced and what happened. Do I account this to OPEX day? Not really. I really don't. I say we came to a massive level. Sellers couldn't get us through. We also had the Fed saying certain things, and we reacted right as the Fed was saying those. We did not bounce prior to the Fed saying what they had to say. So it's important to really realize that. Some of you call it composite man. It is what it is, right? Always getting the news at the exact right moment. So when we look at what's happening here, let's talk about it. So we start breaking right back through all these levels. And when I was talking about the downside push on the NASDAQ and ES, right? The whole visual, when we look at this chart, was we had local highs, we bounced above, mounted, pushed up, mounted, pushed up, mounted, pushed up, right? It was like stairs to the upside. And we kept saying to get verified the downside, we need to break through these big levels. And with ES, we need to hold below like 3,900. With the NASDAQ, it was about 11.3. And when we look at both of these charts, it's really easy to see where we bounced. And it was at most of these really big levels. So again, that's why I say, do we need to overcomplicate it with throwing out random reasons why stuff happens? Or can we use the data and the information that we've been using here to make all of our trades so far, which is supply and demand, and also looking at fundamental data that's being released? And I think that it's pretty simple, right? I don't think we have to jump to conclusions or use any of the trading voodoo or anything like that, right? There was no magic crossover or anything like that. You bounced. It's what happens, right? And that's really the basis of supply and demand. You expect buyers to show up at demand. You expect sellers to show up at supply. That's how it works. And that's why I tell people, if your trade moves a certain amount, you can't just say, oh, well, it has to break through this since it already broke through the previous supply or previous demand. It's not how it works. Supply and demand is a constant always, right? So you're taking that risk by holding through it no matter what. So you have to understand that. So we got the drop we wanted, but we could not get follow through. Now, when we look at volume, let's talk about specifically what happened here on this push to the upside. Now, when we look at this, it gets interesting. So obviously we had increased selling towards the downside. We hit basically 11.4 with no volume to the buy side. And then we opened up the next day with decent volume. And then we pushed down heavy with quite a bit, right? Our highest volume since basically January 6th. Now from that point, we continued to the downside with still somewhat increased volume above the 30-day average. And then obviously we had increased volume to the downside once again. We hit that level. And then obviously buyers stepped right back into the market. And buyers stepped into the market with above average volume. The 30-day average of volume on the S&P is around 80 million right now. So you came in better. This was good. This was a good show up from buyers. Now, what I can say from this though, when we look at OPEX is yes, typically your volume does look better on those days. Typically. But that does not always mean you're going to get a very volatile move up or a very volatile move down. So again, that's why I always say this. And again, it's not for me to say, well, it doesn't matter. It's just saying that, again, you, the viewer, do not care whenever you don't get the movement. And then when you do get the movement, you do care. So I'm just saying there might be an issue with the way that you're charting or the way that you're just looking at the market. You can't say things are important when they show, context, they show value, and then say they're not important when they don't show value. Something has to overall be important at all times, like supply and demand. Just because we go through a supply level doesn't mean supply and demand isn't important. I'm still going to use it every single day. But I have to acknowledge it every single time it happens, right? So we have to understand where we're using and not just using things when they suit our case to the bull or to the bear case, right? So we have to understand that, and I try to stay accountable with that. Now, as we look back, Microsoft earnings Tuesday. Okay, so these are the earnings we're gonna have all week. We have some bigger earnings, I'm not gonna lie. There's the Tesla's on Wednesday. I don't think Tesla's gonna move the market overall. I'm gonna tell you that right now. Typically, we don't get crazy movements on Tesla. If I had to say anything would have a bigger impact on the market, I would have to say either Boeing, which could help the Dow a lot. I think Boeing will have decent earnings, or Intel. I think Intel has a lot of momentum with the market. Intel and Visa may be there. Besides that, I'm not too concerned. Again, Microsoft is going to be so big because it's going to lead the way for a lot of these tech companies, right? Like Apple, Nvidia, etc. Intel probably a little bit, AMD and Nvidia also, but again, this is my main one. I think Microsoft has the biggest impact. We've seen how the market reacts to it. That's why I'm basing on it. We still have good earnings this week. There's a lot going on here, but again, that's my main focus is going to be Microsoft. Earning Whisperers is probably a great account to follow on Twitter and just their website when it comes to looking at earnings and looking at the expectations and days. They're usually never wrong. So would definitely use them. I'm not sponsored by them, but they're a great platform, and I'll always shout out great platforms. So going back to the Nasdaq expectations here. Now I'm going to tell you, it's still the same thing. Supply and demand, supply and demand, supply. I can only say it so many times, right? I'm still expecting us to get a reaction from the 11.75, most likely towards the downside. But what I will say, if going into Monday volume persists and it stays towards the upside with this action happening, you should break out. I would anticipate you break out if volume stays higher. Now, what's happening in the market that's quote unquote bullish? Let's discuss that exactly. We have China's full reopening, and China is really, foot on the gas right now. They are 100% foot on the gas, no pun intended, with how much energy they're using. But they're really, full throttle here. So my question going into this is, can this fuel the longer term downside potential, which we've discussed? Because if demand starts spiking back up and prices start spiking specifically with commodities, you have to expect inflation to, start, raising back up. However, in the short term, this would cause you to be, short-term bullish. I'm just saying, looking at the facts, looking at the visuals, these are the major concerns right now. And so when we look at this also, again, I'm going to keep saying and keep pointing out, we'll go to the VIX here in a second, but I think oil is probably the most important chart right now. I think we have to be watching it day in, day out. If we look at oil, you are bottoming down here right now. It looks also like, again, you shouldn't consider this an ascending triangle yet because you really haven't been moving in a bullish structure. But if you're looking at what's happening, you are making higher lows and you're pushing up to this point right now. So again, it's looking like you want to start breaking out. I'm just saying it's looking like you're trying to get that formation and that breakout potential there. Looking at overall what's happening with, oil, the barrel, etc. Now, when we look at these companies also, you might have noticed when we look at the earnings chart, what's happening here. We have CVX. So we're going to have more oil companies start announcing their earnings, right? That's coming in. And those companies continue to thrive. They continue to kill it. When we look at CVX, again, they look amazing. They're very close to local highs. Again, very similar pattern to what's happening with the barrel. And I want you to notice, CVX did not take as big of a dip as the barrel did. So these are all things we need to definitely be focused on. If you look at this daily chart, again, incredibly, incredibly bullish. Going to something like ZOM, some of these other oil companies, you're just damn near at all-time highs already. We go deeper into Oxy, which, Warren Buffett's. I would not be surprised to see this man be buying more. I've been telling y'all, as you're hitting this trend line, oil continues to ramp up. And I know people are like, well, Tyler, why are you harping on oil? Why are you harping on these companies? If you're new to the channel, what do we know? When oil prices go up, what happens to inflation? It spikes, it spikes, it spikes. When we look at all that data, where does all that data point to where inflation is actually dropping? It's primarily in energy and commodities. What do we know now from JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, all the big banks? What are they most bullish on this year? Commodities, energy, everything in between. There's a reason why even here in America, our energy prices have still gone up. Yes, maybe at the pump, locally gas has gone down, but that's not going to last forever. SPR, all-time lows right now. Very, very low where we have to refill. And we've already said they're probably going to do it very slowly because the prices are where they want them. What did the U.S. agree on? They said they would start reloading at 70 a barrel. It's not going to happen. That's my opinion. That's based on the facts. That's based on everything that I've been covering. And again, I try to share all this data with you, but I try not to go over in repetition every single day. So these are things I'm looking at. And so you're asking, well, Tyler, if you're looking at that sense, well, how does this align with the short term? When we look at oil, it's been a massive lagging indicator. And I want it to be on record now that if oil continues to go up, I've already said inflation will spike once again. But the things we need to understand is it won't show instantly. But like the next future CPI and PPI, those will be affected towards the upside, specifically on energy. And then it will start rolling over into specific areas of the market and your everyday spending, which are still at local all-time highs right now. That's why the Fed continues to say, and I say this in almost every video, right now is the hardest time for middle and lower class when it comes to inflation. So just understand that. Although in the short term, we have good signs, and I'm going to say this right now, I try to be as unbiased as possible here. We do have good signs. And I'm telling you, if these earnings show out well, Microsoft specifically, I see us having some volatility to the upside. Okay. Now, could they easily come out to the downside? Yes. Based on revisions, it makes me less optimistic that we're going to come out to the downside. But again, this is just my visual, what I'm looking at. And I think, again, Microsoft is where you got to keep your focus. On the charts, though, as long as we're below 11.75, 11.800, basically, I'm a bear. On Nasdaq, I am a bear. The Nasdaq has been leading the market right now, but again, I'm going to tell you right now, if you're below 11.8, you're a bear. You have limited upside. The play is still to the downside based on risk to reward, right? Because if you break over the supply, you cut it. If you break to the downside, again, you have another 400 or 500 points back towards the downside. So that's what I'm looking at. That's what I'm watching. ES, I think it's pretty easy, pretty clear to be, viewing here. You're definitely lagging in comparison to the Nasdaq. That maybe your supply level is a little bit more, restricted, if you will. But I'm going to tell you right now, you're still at the top of this trend, your year-long bear trend. Okay, still at the top of it. You have not broken out on the ES. Going to NQ again, still have not broken out. You're still below it. And again, when we're looking at ES, I think it's probably the easiest one to be watching, right? Again, the only indicator I think you really need to have on your chart when it comes to watching ES right now is going to be the 100 and 200 SMA. And we're looking right now, you got to close back above it. This is one of the first times that you've broke down and reclaimed it within a day. You had a push back here back in December where we mounted it, pushed back above and got rejected. You've actually remounted it here. So that does look good on the 200. Again, we did not break below that 100 SMA, which I talked about. We need to get back below that to really look bearish. But again, you started to get a bounce. That's where you're at now. So what I'm watching for here is how do we react? How do we hold around this 200 SMA? Again, I want to tell you now, I don't see crazy volatility happening until Microsoft earnings come out. Unless the Fed says something crazy, which again, they've been saying really wild things, all the past week. Last week it was we're having a 25 basis point hike. There's a 100% chance. Then it was multiple Feds saying we're having a 50-point hike. Then it was inflation not going down. Then it was inflation was great. So when we're looking at the Fed, we can't really rely on things they say, and it really does bring volatility quick. So again, when we're looking at the market and looking at equities we like, My opinion is if you're scalping and day trading, it's got to be really quick in and out, and you can't be greedy. If you're swing trading, you have to be prepared to get some time in the opposite direction of what you're trading. Also, that's just my opinion, because right now you have a lot of uncertainty. You have the Fed saying, sporadic statements. You never know what they're going to say. So you just got to be ready either way, in my opinion. So with swings, I think they're more dangerous than ever now. If you're doing scalps and day trades, I encourage very quick decision making. Again, if we look just really quick, going back here, if we look back at what's happening on like the 1 hour time frame, so I'm gonna leave you with, it's very indecisive, right? Option contracts can very quickly turn red. You can be very green, then instantly turn red. So just understand that when you're trading this. That's the biggest statement I can say to anyone that's day trading right now. I'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one, traders.